Chairman Holbert, thank you for allowing me to adjust the schedule. I'm going to return the floor to you. I believe you have a elk presentation.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought Director Carter was going to tell his elk restocking program in West Tennessee earlier when he was going to take his personal preference, but don't know what you're going to tell that sometime, aren't you? I'd like to recognize Brad Miller to give us an update on the elk season.
Good morning, everyone. So today I will give you a brief update about our recently concluded elk season. As you know, we have essentially 3 hunts, with this year being a little bit different, where hunters could choose to hunt either public land or private land. The new archery hunt was a 5-day hunt, had 5 hunters. We had our standard firearm hunt, a 5-day hunt, 5 hunters, and then a youth season, which is a weekend, 2-day hunt for a single hunter. And it was bulls only. So results, the archery season, we had 5 hunters that hunted pretty hard. However, we did not have any success this year. There were 4 shots taken on bulls this year. 3 bulls were missed cleanly. 1 was hit but not recovered, possibly a lethal hit, likely a lethal hit. The bugling was really good. Bulls were coming to calls. However, it just didn't work out this year. All archery hunters were on public land this year. The firearm, and please interrupt me and stop me if you have any questions. The firearm season was October 17th to 21st, 5-day hunt, 5 hunters again. You know, it was a little bit challenging this year. We had really, really high temperatures. We had a great mast crop this year, and the drought impaired our wildlife openings. Our seed that was planted just didn't come up very well. So, you know, the elk were really keyed into the woods, and as a result, we only had 3 bulls harvested this year. We had a really nice 5x5 taken on the first day. It dressed out at almost 650 pounds. It's a really good bull. We had the illegal elk that I'm sure you all have read about. That was a smallish 5x6. And then the 3rd day of the hunt, on a Wednesday, we had a nice 4x3 taken. The youth hunt, unfortunately, was not successful this year. I think in years past, the youth hunter has always taken an elk. However, as you see in this chart, for 2016, Zones 1 and Zones 4, you know, were closed to give those 2 zones a chance to rest. And those were our most productive, really good zones, but had been hit hard in recent years. So traditionally, those zones were keyed into by a lot of hunters and very successful, as well as the youth hunter, because the youth hunter can choose any zone he or she wants. But all in all, three animals checked, and you know, we're going to start our planning for next year, and hopefully we'll have a very successful hunt next year. Zones 1 and 4 will be back in the rotation. And as I've said, those are really good zones, so I expect our harvest to be a little higher next year. Of the 11 hunters we had, 10 hunted exclusively on public land. 1 hunter switched back and forth between a piece of private land that he obtained access to, as well as some public land. And that's all I have. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Brad. Any questions?
Brad, we've had discussions in the past trying to get a handle on how many animals we have. I'm not going to ask you that question, but what are we doing to try to ascertain how big our herd is now?
Well, we're going to do our traditional survey this winter, where we have marked individuals. I think this has all been explained 100 times. Marked individuals, kind of a mark recite sort of deal based on ratios. But I've been talking to the University of Tennessee, and there are other state agencies and the Park Service as well are looking into using fecal DNA to determine population size. Where essentially it's like the bear hair snares, where you go out and you have either transects or sampling plots. You obtain a sample. You can analyze a number of individuals, relate that to where they're found on the landscape. Long story short, it's possible for elk. It's kind of a new technology. It's been done for deer a lot, and we may be able to use that to come up with a population estimation technique and ultimately a number. However, it's a little bit more expensive than just going out with spotlights and thermal units counting elk. It's $40-ish per sample. But long story short, hopefully I'll be back in the spring to talk about research proposals, because we've got a lot of things that we'd like to learn, and the population size is certainly one of those.
Brad, I understand from talking to some folks that with the dryness that we've had this fall and the food plots themselves did miserably, are we considering or are thinking about possibly supporting with hay over the winter to make sure our herd stays healthy?
I can't answer that right now. It's something that we've been talking about and has been talked about for years past. I would just have to get with the elk team and with my supervisors and hash that out.
Any other questions?
Are Zone 6 and 7 Tackett Creek?
Zone 7 is Tackett Creek.
Okay,
And
so we've hunted it for 2 years with no success.
yeah, it's a really big area. Zone 7's like, 70,000 acres. Our archery hunter saw a really good bull, called in a bull, I'm not sure what the size of it was, and missed that bull. Our gun hunter went in there, said he ranged a bull at 700 and some odd yards, and from that distance knew it was a really good bull, and saw a different bull a couple of days later chasing a cow and a calf. There are bulls in there, just hadn't worked out there yet. I would definitely like to keep that in the rotation for next year.
The hunter who bought the tag, what was his success?
Unfortunately, he was not successful this year. He hunted on a piece of private land as well as the public land, and I think he saw some cows and had a small bull close to him, but it just didn't work out for him, unfortunately.
Any other questions? Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner, thank you. Brad, great to have you on board. Thanks for being on top of this, and I will continue to give Commissioner McMillan praise. He is the one who has led the charge on increasing opportunities for all hunters, including our youth. And even though it wasn't as successful years we've had in the past, we wouldn't have those opportunities without his efforts. So Commissioner McMillan, thank you for your part of the story in this. It's greatly appreciated. Commissioner Bledsoe, the Commission recognizes the Fisheries Management Committee. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Cannon. I'd like to call to the podium Frank Fisk, Chief of the Fisheries Division.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to welcome Mr. Jerry Dinkins. He is here today to talk about Tennessee mussels. He's the co-owner of Dinkins Biological Consulting, and he's the curator of the mussel collection at the McClung Museum of Natural History and Culture here at the University of Tennessee. And he's got 30 years of experience in aquatic resources and mussels, and he and his group are a partner to our ongoing mussel work and part of the mussel working group that operates in the Southeast. Jerry?
Let the record reflect that he has a very good-looking orange shirt on, Director Carter, and
I somehow had the good fortune of picking out an orange shirt today. I'm glad I didn't wear red, that's for sure. I also want to thank the commission for inviting me to speak, and I actually have a connection to the commission. Commissioner Ripley and I were roommates a long time ago. We were both single.
We do sympathize and feel for you.
I don't know that I'd
Oh, that one.
Yeah, well, Jim was in law school, and I was in graduate school at this time. I was working on a master's studying non-game fish. Jim was studying the law. And we shared an apartment for about 2 years. And it's appropriate that you're having me speak so close to Thanksgiving, because one evening, Jim and I are at our apartment, and there's a knock on the door. We lived in a fairly large apartment complex, and Jim goes over to answer the door, and there's 2 small trick-or-treaters. We didn't even know it was Halloween. And Jim says, just a minute. He looks at me and he goes, we don't not only have any candy, we hardly have any food. Jim goes in the kitchen, rumbles around for a bit, comes back with a loaf of white bread. It's a true story. Opens the door back up, and there's the 2 little trick-or-treaters looking up at him, and he drops into each of their basket a slice of white bread. The kids look in their basket, look up at Jim, and just slowly back away. Jim says, I thought that went well. Oh, a lawyer can turn anything into a good story. So I'm going to talk about sort of non-game issues today with y'all. I want to say, you know, if you live in the world that I live in, which is aquatic biodiversity, Tennessee is the state to be in. And TWRA has some very competent people in charge of biodiversity, and I want to thank them for all they do, starting with, you know, with Bill Reeves and Frank Fiss and Dave McKinney and Mark Thurman. Our biodiversity is in good, capable hands. And working with them is the state malacologist, Don Hubbs. I work with Don quite a bit. And because I have a consulting business that requires me to travel to a lot of states to do my work, I have a federal permit that covers about 25 states, all federally listed fish, mussels, and snails. And in my travels, I coordinate and collaborate with state malacologists, you know, through most of the eastern United States. And if you mention Don Hubbs's name anywhere in the eastern United States, you'll always get the same response. Every state wishes they had somebody like Don Hubbs. So Don is underwater today. He's in a river somewhere moving mussels, and you have a lot to be thankful for in having Don Hubbs as part of TWRA. So with that, what are freshwater mussels? Well, they're mollusks, and the 2 groups that people are most familiar with when we talk about mollusks are bivalves, and there's marine, they're freshwater, and there's snails or gastropods. And there's marine, freshwater, and land snails. And so there's other mollusks, and I curate the mollusk collection at the University of Tennessee. Our collection at UT is really primarily devoted to freshwater mussels and aquatic and land gastropods. We do have some of these other or class of mollusks in our collection, but really because we're in Tennessee, we really highlight and focus on freshwater mussels. Now, I'm going to walk you through real quickly the history of mussel research in Tennessee, and then we'll talk about sort of the state of our freshwater mussel fauna. And it's somewhat depressing because of the declines, but that's not just unique to Tennessee. But then we're going to talk about real briefly, a couple of success stories, recent success stories, and then talk about the McClung Museum or the University of Tennessee's mollusk collection, what it means on sort of a larger scale. So there's a long history of mussel research in Tennessee going back to the late 1800s. And over that time, what we know as our state fauna has sort of been refined as we've developed new techniques for identifying species and teasing apart which ones are unique and which ones are really, you know, two maybe the same species. But it all started back in the 1800s by Henry Pillsbury and Samuel Rhodes, and they said there were 66 species in the state. Arnold Ortman, 1918, the first curator of mollusks at the Carnegie updated their list, included to 88 species, and then you can see there was sort of a gap in time in terms of mussel research. You jump ahead to the 1950s, and then what you saw in Tennessee was sort of individual river surveys or treatments of individual rivers. And, beginning with the Vandershaleys they were from Philadelphia Academy. Then you see the advent of mussel research being conducted by TVA biologists, Billy Ison, Paul Yoakley, then on down to Steve Alstead, and on to almost the present time. The first real comprehensive treatment of our state's freshwater mussel fauna was done by Lynn Starnes and Art Bogan, both graduate students at the University of Tennessee, and they recognized 155 species. That's changed a little bit, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. But they sort of addressed the history of mussel research in Tennessee and resolved some issues relating to taxonomy or how you name things, and talked about the effects of how some of our species are being affected by different things. But then the seminal work was in 1998 by Dr. Paul Parmley and his graduate student Art Bogan, and the Mussels of Tennessee book came out. This set a very high bar for all state mussel books that came after it. Paul was a dear friend of mine, and he passed away about 11 years ago, and I replaced him at the University of Tennessee as the curator of the mollusk collection. But this book talks about a lot of things relating to freshwater mussels, and it's being revised now because of more recent advances in taxonomy. We know he treated 129 species. We know there's a little bit more than that now. So what do we have today? Well, as I said, Tennessee is sort of the epicenter of aquatic biodiversity. We have 137 species out of, if you think about in the United States being a little less than 300, that's a fairly significant portion of the U.S.'s fauna. And then the Southeast is really the center. It's not just Tennessee, it's Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky. So out of the 269 species in the Southeast, we have 137 of them. And here's sort of a state-by-state breakdown. You can see Tennessee is behind Alabama. Glad I'm not wearing a red shirt. They have 178 species to our 137. But I will say, if you're a fish person, we have the upper hand. We have more species of freshwater fish than Alabama. You look at these 11 states, there's 269 mussel species in these 11 states, okay? Texas, which is an area that's basically the same geographic coverage as this, has 50. So if you live in my world, this is the state and part of the country you want to be in. All right, so out of the 137 species in Tennessee, here's what we know about them. We have 108 of them are still with us. They're still extant. We've lost 10 species in our state, but those 10 species can be found in other states. So those are the extirpated ones. We've lost 16 species to extinction. The 16 species we've lost to extinction are all in one group, the Epioblasmas. They evolved to live in big river, shallow water habitat. These were species that occurred in the main channel, shoal habitat of the Tennessee and Cumberland River. That habitat is no longer. It's all impounded from all the way from the confluence of the Ohio up to Knoxville. There's 3 species that's in our historic fauna. We really don't know if they're still with us or not. Now, Tennessee is behind Alabama in terms of extinction. Alabama's lost 22 species. We've lost, as I said, 16. But I'm going to conclude my talk sort of an uplifting point, and that's one of the species that we've kind of recovered from extinction. So here's the Tennessee. Let me see. I don't have my whole. This is the North American sort of a summary of what's going on in North America. And if you take like the extinct, the vulnerable, the threatened, and the endangered, and consider those to be the imperiled species, that's about 70% of the North American fauna is in trouble. Here it is for Tennessee. If you combine the extinct, the vulnerable, the threatened, the endangered components of our 137 species, it's about 70% is imperiled. So we're sort of on the same rate of decline as the rest of the country. Now, that's the bad news. Here's two good stories. Alabama lamp mussel and pale lilliput, both very, very rare. In fact, the Alabama lamp mussel was functionally extinct. Both were listed as federally endangered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 1976. 2011, I was poking around in the upper Emory River in Morgan County near Wartburg with a close friend and colleague, Hugh Faust, when we found a mussel that we weren't sure what it was, but I suspected it might be an Alabama lamp mussel. We ran DNA on it, or the Fish and Wildlife Service did, and confirmed it was in fact Alabama lamp mussel. The Alabama lamp mussel was discovered in the mid-1800s in the Tennessee River at Florence, Alabama. It has historically been a very, very rare species. There's less than 100 specimens of this mussel in collections across the globe. There were a number of populations. These 100 specimens that are in historic collections came from various places, and it was the Tennessee River system endemic. It ranged from Bear Creek in the lower end of the Tennessee system all the way up to Coal Creek, which comes in to the Clinch right below Norris Dam. It was probably a species of the tributaries. Although the first one was found in the main channel of Tennessee, it really was one that was an inhabitant of the tributaries. By 2009, though, it was restricted to a short reach of the Paint Rock River in Alabama. And the Mussels of Alabama book that came out in 2009, they concluded that it is probably the most imperiled mussel species in North America. It was being artificially kept going by the Alabama Aquatic Biodiversity Center. They were raising these things in a hatchery, putting them into the Paint Rock River, trying to bolster that population. And after a few years of doing this, what they concluded that the only ones they were seeing were the ones that they were putting in. So the thing was really extinct in the wild until our discovery. I got a grant from the Nature Conservancy to do a survey of the Emory River where we found this mussel, and we found it actually occurs over 12 miles of the river. It's not very common, but it's still hanging on, and it's still hanging on today. Pale lilliput, that's the other good story. Another very, very rare mussel discovered in the 1800s in the Duck, it was described as Duck Creek, which is actually the Duck River. It had a somewhat similar distribution. It was a Tennessee River endemic. It was restricted to the sort of the middle and lower reaches of the Tennessee River, Duck River up to the Sequatchie River. And like the Alabama lamp mussel, its populations had declined till it was only being found in even a shorter reach of the Paint Rock River, but in Alabama, sort of on the straddling the Alabama-Tennessee border. That was until a couple of years ago, David Sims, TWRA biologist, was in Middle Tennessee checking on a tributary to the Duck River and Lick Creek, and lo and behold, he found several. These things have been taken into the TWRA hatchery, and where Huadon, the TWRA hatchery specialist or manager, is now getting these things to spawn in captivity, and they are being reintroduced. They've been reintroduced to the Duck River, and they're going to be put back into the Buffalo River. This is just a quick summary of things that are going on across the state to conserve our freshwater mussels. Of course, TWRA is leading that charge, and there's 15 years of translocations, 60,000 mussels of 30 species, 12 of them federally endangered, are being managed and moved to try to recover lost populations. TWRA has a new hatchery online now. TWRA is funding research to try to see what we have left in some drainages. Of course, Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal agency in charge of listed species, is in charge of listing and recovery. Forest Service and National Park Service also playing roles. Now, the McClung Museum. This is where I work, and I'm the curator of the collection there. And We have a lot of mussels, and thanks to TWRA biologists, TWRA managers, TWRA wildlife officers come across shells and send them to us, and we have created a large and significant collection. We have freshwater mussels and freshwater gastropods from 89 of Tennessee's 95 counties. We have all 137 species in our collection, including the extinct ones. We have them from every major river drainage. We now have 11,000 lots and over 120,000 specimens. So to put those numbers in context, we rival the Smithsonian now. The Smithsonian has about 12,000 lots. A lot is a collection of shells of a species from a location. So with our backlog material, more stuff coming in all the time because of ongoing research, we expect to surpass the Smithsonian in terms of our representation of freshwater mussels pretty soon. We have freshwater mussels from 41 states, about 25 countries. Out of the almost 300 species that occur in North America, we have specimens of about 250 of those species, again, rivaling the Smithsonian. TWRA has always been a big supporter of our museum, of our collection. If it wasn't for TWRA, the Tennessee book on Tennessee freshwater mussels would have never come out. So I'd like to Paul Parmley is no longer with us, but on behalf of Paul, I would like to thank TWRA for all you've done to support our research efforts. Thank you.
I have well, it's not really a question. So we lived in this apartment complex. And
Commissioner Ripley is not recognized in this, but we'll let you go ahead.
And so it was around Christmas time, and the Mrs. Miller, we'll call her that, who didn't like me at all because I played electric guitar loudly in the complex, decided that we would have a balcony beautification contest. And at that time, Jerry had gotten into duck hunting pretty heavily with Dr. Ettenmeyer, who's a fisheries guide. And Jerry decided, well, he'd read something that said that the best way to prepare a duck for eating it is to hang it by its neck until it, basically the neck and the body separate, and then the duck is ready to eat. So he decorated our balcony with ducks that were hanging from their neck, and we didn't win. We didn't win. Thanks for being here, buddy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Any other questions from the commission? If not, Frank, you want to step up just for question purposes? Yesterday, the Fisheries Management Committee heard Proclamation 16-43, the Sport Fishing Proclamation. We did amend it one time. So, Mr. Chairman, the Fisheries Committee would like to present Proclamation 16-43 as amended.
Thank you, Commissioner Bledsoe. I'll take that in the form of a motion. Do I have a second?
So moved.
Commissioner Watson seconds. Is there any discussion from the commission? Any discussion from the public? Hearing none, all in favor of passing Proclamation 16-43, sport fishing as amended yesterday, indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Proclamation 1643 passes. Commissioner Bledsoe.
Thank you, Chairman Cannon. Fisheries Management Committee met yesterday and passed Proclamation 16-44, the bait fish proclamation, and I move that in its entirety in the form of a motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Bledsoe. Proclamation 1644 regarding bait. We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Have a second from Commissioner Holbert. Any discussion from the commission? Any discussion from the public? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Proclamation 1644 passes. Any other business, sir?
I like my steak rare.
You have your steak rare, as you've done a phenomenal job at shepherding the sport fishing regs. Thank you, sir. With no more fisheries management business, thank you, Frank. Appreciate it. Chair recognizes Kurt Holbert, Vice Chair Biodiversity. Commissioner Holbert, Floor is yours.
I'd like to call on Chief Bill Reeves to come up. Bill, if you would, just read that resolution over quick.
Okay, let
And with
me,
due respect, Bill, the reason we're reading this is this commission has had the chance to read it. However, the public has not heard what's in it, and just so it's a matter of record, we are asking you to read it, please.
okay. And let me say, before I start doing that, that I wrote this up, but I copied it from Montana. If you noticed that what was in your handouts, there's the copy of the Montana resolution is in there, and the Montana Game and Fish and their commission passed it, and so I just basically plagiarized it and changed the name to Tennessee in there where it said Montana.
I love your admission of guilt. That's great.